Good morning, bad news. If you're a young person today, Gen Z or millennial, I'm sorry to say you've been shut out of economic opportunities that existed for many of us old geezers.
Baby boomers are destroying the economy for Gen Z, and worse, they're starting to blame Gen Z for their actions, calling them lazy, entitled, and not fun to work with. Let's look at these TikToks because they expose a huge truth that's happening in the economy right now, and there's a reckoning between the two generations coming faster than we may expect.
Good morning, bad news. If you're a young person today, Gen Z or millennial, I'm sorry to say you've been shut out of economic opportunities that existed for many of us old geezers. No matter what influencers or financial gurus on TikTok tell you, no amount of hustling or gig work can replace a system that was once designed to help you prosper. Millennials are deeper in debt, half as likely to own a home, and more likely to live in poverty than their parents were, despite being more educated and working more hours. How and why did that system work for many of your parents and grandparents, and why doesn't it help you today?
This is the way to further growth and advancement. This is the way to greater opportunity and better living for all of us. This is the key to an ever stronger American economy.
I'm Robert Reich here for Good Morning Bad News. And let's talk about how in your lifetime, healthcare, housing, and education expenses have soared while wage growth has stagnated. The federal minimum wage has fallen from being a living wage to a starvation wage. And if these weren't enough, 2 global recessions and a pandemic have likely stunted your...
Exactly. And that's the huge thing that baby boomers don't realize is that, of course, they had high inflation, but what they did have was livable wages. And that's something that Gen Z and millennials, but mostly Gen Z, is getting hit with right now, an unlivable wage. It's absolutely having its fingers over every single thing in the economy, and it is creating a lot of economic turmoil, so much so that the Gen Z feels so scared to even engage and put in time and effort into this economy because they feel like they're just going to be spinning on a hamster wheel over and over and over again. Dr. Phil has a crazy clip about this, and let's look at this TikTok next. It's absolutely wild about this Gen Z and what he did when he felt like there's just nothing he can do to get ahead.
Gen Z has used this opportunity to say, no, I'm not going into work.
This Gen Z man name is Edwin, and what he did at his job is sparking international debate and landing him in national news. It's causing boomers to freak out. Edwin said that when he was at work, he was not getting respected, so what he did next shocked the world.
I quit. I'm quitting this job.
And his actions caused boomers to have a meltdown and confront him on live TV. There's something crucial about what happened that these boomers do not understand. And Dr. Phil is asking, well, what do you want? Why did you act that way? What do you actually want? Edwin said something that's indicative of so many Gen Z's experiences in the workplace right now.
Of course, you want to be paid a reasonable amount, and that
At least something livable.
He says he wants to get paid at least something livable. Baby boomers don't understand that because look at this graph. The bottom line is hourly compensation since 1948. The top line is productivity per employee. So you can see how back in boomers' day, 1973, all the way to even 1980, pretty much matched up. Now, look at this huge disparity between how much you're producing as an employee and how much hourly wages you're getting.
And that's, once again, the critical piece here. Yes, baby boomers had a huge inflation. Yes, they had to work hard. Yes, they had to pay for houses, trips, vacation, and kids, just like Gen Z and millennials do. However, they were able to do that on a minimum wage salary. And if not minimum wage, at least what their workers and what their bosses and business were paying them was enough for them to do all those things. Now it is broken down, and you can see that graph that was in that TikTok. It's broken down over the last 30 years, whereas now there's a huge discrepancy between what workers are doing productivity-wise and then what they're getting paid. They can't live off that. You saw Edwin in that video, although he quit in a wild and righteous kind of way. You saw him explain that he just wants a livable wage. He was also talking about wanting respect from his employer, and that is something that a lot of people disagree with too. They think you should work and earn respect as opposed to just come in and demand respect. But the Gen Z is saying that we should get respect just because we are humans and every human should be valued, and we deserve respect just from that, not based off our performance, because they can't perform when they can't afford to live. Now, of course, one of the main things that baby boomers say is that, well, back in my day, we had 13% interest rates on houses. Now, let's look at this TikTok that has a crazy spin on that.
Don't forget the boomers had 13% interest rates in the 80s. I wish we had 13% interest rates today if that meant we had your home prices. In 1980, the median household income was $22,000 and the median home price was $47,000. That was only twice the yearly salary. And if you wanted to put down a 20% down payment and closing costs, it would cost you about $11,000, which is only half the yearly salary. So you had your 13% interest rates, your monthly payment was $485 a month, which was only 26% of your gross income. Now, if we had the same setup that you did in the 80s, our median household income is $80,000. That means the house price would sit around $170,000. A 20% down payment, closing cost would be $40,000. 13% interest rates would put our payment at $1,790 a month, which is 26% of our gross income. All would be well in the world. But here's our actual reality. Median household income, $80,000. The median home price in 2024 is $419,000, which is 5 times the salary. And if you wanted to put down 20% and closing costs, it would be $100,000, which is more than the actual yearly salary. Even though we have 7% interest rates, the payment out the door is still $2,800 a month, which would eat away at 42% of our income. And here's the kicker. Someone making $80,000 in most cases can't even qualify for this. In fact, I wouldn't even recommend anyone making 80 grand spend more than $300,000 on a house because you don't want to be house poor.
And that's another thing too. Not only are the houses so unaffordable nowadays, you can hardly find anything. I'm a house flipper. I flip houses. I've been doing that for about 8 years now. And we specialize in first-time home buyer fix and flips. So we're flipping things that you cannot get a loan on until we fix it. And then as soon as we fix it, a first-time home buyer can get a loan on it. Now, why is that important? That's important because I've seen firsthand how out of touch the market is to these first-time home buyers. They don't have a ton of money to buy a home. And that's why when we fix up a home, it goes relatively quickly because there's more home buyers, first-time home buyers, than there are homes to get. And sometimes it takes them 3 or 4 years to find a home. And that's 3 or 4 years of equity they were not going to be able to get into their house. Like that's 3 or 4 years of equity that they don't have for the rest of their life. I mean, that could be tens of thousands of dollars. And when someone that already doesn't have a lot of money is missing out on tens of thousands of dollars, it's a significant part. And it could really boost them and help them out. So the housing crisis is absolutely insane too. So this TikTok really says some other shocking things about the state of the economy.
Good morning. Very bad news. Millennials and Gen Z are the poorest generations in US history. Not only do they have less money than any generation before them at their age, but by comparison, they also have the lowest average wages, exponentially more debt, no financial mobility or retirement options, statistically no savings, and for that matter, almost no benefits like healthcare or paid sick leave, while at the same time paying the highest rent and childcare costs in history. Both generations have also been entering the workforce during the worst economic crises we've seen since the Great Depression. But don't worry, it gets worse. Not only do our generations have no money, we can't get it, because every system of wealth that every generation before us has taken advantage of has been completely closed off to us to make those previous generations outrageously wealthy. There are about 70 million baby boomers and 70 million millennials in the United States, and in total there's $112 trillion worth of wealth. Baby boomers control 53% of it, or about $60 trillion, coming out to $850,000 per person, while millennials hold just 4.6%, or about $70,000 each. When baby boomers were our age, they held 21% of the wealth, which actually makes sense proportionally and generationally. So why is there such a massive generational wealth gap? Keep watching for part 2.
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing. Baby boomers are hoarding all the wealth and keeping it in their expensive houses that are all paid off, and they just don't want to leave and get high interest rates now, and also keeping it in retirement accounts, savings accounts, and they're hoarding it. They're not using it. So it has to go somewhere, and it's all in the baby boomers' hands. This is why we created a Gen Z newsletter and a Gen Z free community group in school where we get in and talk about it and teach about personal finance. Because in order to overcome, we're going to see one more TikTok in a second, but in order to overcome all these harsh realities, you're going to need to be as educated as possible about your personal financial situation, and you're going to need to have some really good support and people to ask questions. So everything's free. All the content is free. So sign up on the newsletter or sign up on the school group. But this TikTok is shocking.
Good morning, bad news. Capitalism is dead. Now, to many of you, that might sound like good news until you find out that it's been replaced by a much worse, more exploitative, and aggressively unsustainable economic system that we can best describe as decapitated capitalism or decapitalism. It's the reality that we're living in right now, where the very few protections afforded to us under capitalism, simply because the billionaire class needed most of us relatively healthy and alive to generate capital through labor, are gone because technically they don't need us anymore. The simplest way to describe what is happening is that the health of the economy is no longer tied to the economic health of its population. which we can all clearly see happening today as the stock market skyrockets in value and billionaires double their net worth while most of the country struggles to afford even basic necessities. In previous decades, when all signs pointed to a market crash, the market crashed. But in this case, it didn't. Instead, the S&P 500 hit a record high. Billionaires made $1 trillion while the rest of the country went bankrupt. And under traditional capitalism, that's impossible. There's no way to build that much capital if your workforce is unemployed, unproductive, and dying at an alarming rate. Without workers and consumers, where is the money coming from? And the answer is out of thin air. The money that flooded global markets during the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't really exist in the way that it ever has before. In response to the very obvious and prolonged market crash that should have happened during the pandemic, the Federal Reserve in the United States and central banks in other countries quickly printed trillions of dollars to pump into the stock market, which went directly to stock market shareholders and business owners in the form of inflated stock prices, while devaluing the comparatively small amount of money held by the middle and working class. Today, the bottom 50% of Americans, about 165 million people, hold $3 trillion in net worth, while just 745 billionaires hold $5 trillion in net worth. And the economic health of the bottom 50% has almost no impact on billionaires, as clearly evidenced by the absurd stock market gains we've seen this year. The entire reason the stock market went up during an otherwise economic crash is because the billionaire class knew that money was coming. Because when the market crashed 15 years ago and industries were deemed too big to fail and bailed out, it served as a guarantee going forward that billionaires and their companies would be protected by taxpayer dollars and debt. It doesn't matter anymore what the poverty rate or unemployment rate really are, because if it gets too hot for people like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they can count on a wild spending spree by central banks to keep them afloat. The world's economic power brokers realized that they could just funnel trillions of dollars to themselves, keep the stock market afloat, and ignore everyone else. On an individual level, rampant inflation has absolutely no bearing on the quality of life of a multimillionaire or billionaire who doesn't care how much a gallon of gas or a loaf of bread costs, while being absolutely devastating and life-altering to a person living paycheck to paycheck whose purchasing power is shriveling down to nothing. It used to be the case that under capitalism, it was in a business owner's best interest to make sure their exploited workers were able to generate capital for them to steal through wage theft. But now that capital comes almost entirely from debt-generated investments and bailouts in an inflated and unsustainable economic system that's based on just printing money. And when that very obvious house of cards collapses, the ones at the top won't fall down with the rest of us. They've got helicopters and golden parachutes to save them. They'll be fine, and we'll be Thanks for watching. Good morning.
Yeah, so join the school group and also join the free email newsletter, because this is a crucial time to be caring about your personal financial situation and learning about how to save yourself from this capitalist society.